Picture this. You're standing on the rugged west coast of Ireland. Wind is biting at your face, the Atlantic is crashing below, and you're looking at the people around you. Now, you've seen the postcards. You know what Irish is supposed to look like. Red hair, freckles, rosy cheeks. Grand. But the person standing next to you has jet black hair, porcelain skin, eyes so blue or so deep hazel that they almost don't look real. And they're not a tourist. Their family has been in this village for generations, maybe centuries. Who are they? That question has haunted historians, geneticists, and millions of Irish families for a very long time. These people were given a name, the Black Irish. And those two words carry more mystery, more heartbreak, and more jaw-dropping historical truth than almost anything else in the human story. Buckle up, because what you're about to hear is going to completely flip everything you thought you knew. Let's start with the story that everyone loves to tell. It's dramatic. It's romantic. It's got shipwrecks and star-crossed sailors and coastal villages. Perfect for a movie, really. The year is 1588. Spain has assembled the most terrifying naval fleet the world has ever seen. 130 warships, roughly 30,000 men, all pointed toward England. This is the famous Spanish Armada, and it is supposed to be unstoppable. It was not unstoppable. A combination of English naval firepower, brutal Atlantic storms, and frankly some spectacular strategic mistakes tore the fleet apart. 26 ships were driven off course and smashed against the rocky western coast of Ireland. And here's where the legend kicks in. The story goes that Spanish sailors, dark-haired, olive-skinned, Mediterranean men, somehow survived, crawled onto Irish beaches, found refuge with local families, fell in love, had children, and quietly blended into Irish society. Their descendants, the story says, are the Black Irish. Those strikingly dark people you see in Connemara, in County Clare, in Donegal, all carrying the blood of shipwrecked Spaniards. Beautiful, right? Romantic, cinematic, even. Now here's the part where I ruin it for you. It didn't happen, not even close. Let's look at what the historical record actually shows, because the real story of those sailors is far darker than any romance. Of the roughly 6,000 Spanish men who wrecked on Irish shores, most never made it out of the water. These were soldiers in heavy armor, already weakened after weeks at sea, thrown into freezing Atlantic surf. Hundreds drowned within sight of the beach. The ones who did make it ashore, they found no warm welcome waiting for them. At a place called Streedac Strand in County Sligo, over 1,100 men washed ashore from just 3 ships. A Spanish officer named Captain de Cuellar survived and wrote a first-hand account. He described watching his comrades stripped of everything valuable, their clothes, their coins, their dignity, by locals who had no interest in helping foreign soldiers, only in taking what they had. And it got worse. The English governor at the time, Sir William Fitzwilliam, issued a direct order. Any Spanish survivor found on Irish soil was to be executed immediately. One English commander, Richard Bingham, actually bragged about personally overseeing the killing of more than 300 Armada survivors. Now you might think, surely the Irish chieftains helped them? Surely there was some Catholic solidarity, some shared enemy in England? But even that didn't save most of them. The chieftains who might have wanted to help faced a brutal calculation. Shelter a Spanish soldier, and you're declaring yourself an enemy of the English crown. That means your clan is destroyed, your land is taken, your family is gone. Most handed the survivors over. Self-preservation is a powerful thing. Historians estimate that only a few hundred Armada sailors ever spent any real time on Irish soil, and almost none of them stayed permanently. There are no Spanish surnames appearing in Irish birth records from the late 1500s. None. Geneticist Dan Bradley of Trinity College Dublin said it plainly. The Spanish Armada theory is a myth. A 2015 genetic study led by Professor Walter Bodmer at Oxford confirmed it. There is, at best, a tiny ancient Spanish contribution to Irish DNA, and it predates the Armada by thousands of years. So if it wasn't shipwrecked sailors, then what explains the Black Irish? To answer that properly, we have to go back. Way back. Further than most people are willing to go. We're talking 10,000 years ago. The last ice age is ending. For the first time in millennia, Ireland is actually livable. And the first humans to arrive are not who you'd expect. They were nomadic hunter-gatherers, moving up along the Atlantic coastline, following herds, fishing rivers, reading the landscape for food and shelter. And their features? They would stop you in your tracks today. In 2016, scientists at Trinity College Dublin managed to sequence the oldest human genomes ever recovered from Ireland. One of them belonged to a woman buried 5,000 years ago near Belfast. She's been nicknamed the Ballinahity woman, and her genetic profile sent shockwaves through the scientific community. She had black hair, she had brown eyes, and her closest modern genetic relatives were not in Ireland or Britain or even Western Europe. She was descended from Neolithic farmers who had left the Near East around 6,000 years ago, slowly spread westward across Europe, and eventually arrived in Ireland carrying the seeds of agriculture, the tradition of building stone monuments, and critically, their dark pigmentation genes. Now, fast forward to around 2500 BC. A massive new wave of migration sweeps into Ireland from the eastern steppes of Europe, what is today Ukraine and southern Russia. These are peoples related to what geneticists call the Amnea, and they changed everything. They brought cattle herding. They brought metalworking. They brought the Proto-Celtic languages that eventually became Irish, Welsh, Scottish Gaelic. And they brought lighter features, fairer hair, lighter eyes, a genetic marker called haplogroup R1b that would eventually come to dominate the Irish male lineage. Here's the wild part. Today, Ireland has the highest concentration of haplogroup R1b in the entire world. Over 80% of Irish men carry it. And the second highest concentration in the world? Not England, not France, not Scotland. It's the Basque region of northern Spain and the broader Iberian Peninsula. Let that sink in. The Irish and the Iberians share a profound, ancient genetic kinship. Not because of the Armada, not because of medieval trade, but because of a Bronze Age maritime culture that stretched the entire length of the Atlantic coast, from Portugal all the way up to Ireland, thousands of years ago. They were trading metal, exchanging people, building shared traditions. They left the same genetic fingerprint across the entire Atlantic world. That is the real Irish-Spanish connection. Not a shipwreck in 1588, a blood bond forged 4,000 years before that. But the genetic story doesn't end in the Bronze Age, because Ireland was never as isolated as people imagine. The Vikings arrived in 795 AD. They raided, yes, but they also settled, married, had children. Roughly 20% of Irish men in certain regions today carry clear Viking ancestry in their Y chromosomes. Then came the Normans in 1169, French-speaking descendants of Norse settlers, who brought their own genetic blend from northern France. Surnames like Fitzgerald, Burke, and Power? Norman blood, right there in the name. Then came English colonization, wave after wave from the 1500s onward, each bringing the genetic diversity of a well-connected island nation. And yet, through all of it, in the most isolated valleys of the West, in the bogs of Connaught, in the mountain communities of Munster, the oldest genetics held on. That is why the Black Irish are most concentrated in the west of Ireland. Counties Galway, Clare, Mayo, Connemara, the Aran Islands. These areas were the most cut off from every successive wave of settlement that rolled in from the east and south. The Vikings built cities, Dublin, Waterford, Cork, Limerick, on the eastern and southern coasts. The Normans took the Midlands. The English plantations focused on Ulster and Munster. The West was left largely alone. And then Oliver Cromwell came along and, in one of history's grimmer ironies, actually helped preserve those ancient genetics even further. When Cromwell dispossessed Catholic Irish landowners across the country, he gave them a choice that has become infamous in Irish memory: to hell or to Connaught. He drove them west, to the most barren, rocky, remote corner of the island. And paradoxically, exile into isolation became a kind of preservation. The people pushed there were already among the most Gaelic, most genetically ancient inhabitants of the island. Cut off further, their ancient features persisted through generations. Today in Galway's market towns and Clare's fishing villages, you can see faces that look like they stepped out of a Neolithic settlement from 5,000 years ago. Now here's where the story takes a turn that genuinely shocked me. Because the phrase Black Irish, as a label, as a cultural term, as an identity, did not actually originate in Ireland. It was born in America, and it was born in hatred. Professor Mary Burke of the University of Connecticut spent years researching this exact question. The phrase first appears in American records in the 1830s. It explodes into common usage in the 1840s. And the timing is not coincidental. That is the decade of the Great Famine. Between 1845 and 1852, potato blight wiped out Ireland's food supply. 1 million people died. Another 2 million fled, the vast majority of them to the United States. They arrived in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, malnourished, traumatized, Catholic in a Protestant-dominated society, speaking Gaelic or heavily accented English, dressed in rags, competing for the worst-paying jobs on the dirtiest streets. They were not welcome. The nativist know-nothing movement declared them racially inferior. No Irish need apply signs hung in shop windows across American cities. And in this poisonous atmosphere, Black Irish became a weapon. It was used to separate the desperate new famine arrivals from the earlier, more respectable pre-famine Irish Americans who had already started to assimilate. Calling someone Black Irish implied they were inferior, less civilized, not quite white enough to belong. It was designed to lock them out of social mobility, to keep them in the tenements, to mark them as permanently other. Some Irish Americans then flipped the phrase around and used it in a completely different way, to quietly explain away African American ancestry in families trying to pass in white society. A mixed-race child could be called Black Irish to deflect uncomfortable questions. So a phrase born as a slur, used to degrade immigrants, then co-opted to conceal racial mixing, eventually became something else entirely. It became a romantic identity, a source of pride, a badge of mysterious, exotic origin worn by millions of Irish Americans who knew that something in their story didn't fit the standard ginger stereotype. F. Scott Fitzgerald used the term in his writing, giving it a brooding, melancholy quality. Robert E. Howard, who created Conan the Barbarian, wrote Black Irish characters as passionate, wild, magnetic. The phrase developed a mythology entirely its own, and that mythology buried the actual truth underneath layers of romance and reinvention. So what does modern genetics actually say about dark-featured Irish people? Here is the answer, and it's more powerful than any story anyone ever told about Armada sailors. Those dark features are not an anomaly in the Irish genetic story. They are the story. They are the oldest thread in the entire tapestry. They go back not 400 years, not 4,000 years, but 10,000 years, to the very first humans who ever set foot on Irish soil after the glaciers retreated. Think about what that means for a moment. When you look at a Black Irish face, the jet black hair, those startling eyes, that quality of looking somehow both ancient and vivid, you are looking at 10,000 years of continuous human presence on one island. You're looking at genetics that survived conquest after conquest, famine, diaspora, suppression. You're looking at something that could not be erased, no matter how hard history tried. And here's the part that truly flips the whole narrative on its head. For generations, people with those dark features were told their darkness was foreign, that it came from somewhere else, that they were somehow less purely Irish for carrying it. The Armada story, romantic as it is, implies the exact same thing. Your dark features aren't originally Irish. They came from Spain, from strangers who washed up on a beach. Even the American usage of Black Irish said the same thing in a crueler way. You're not quite fully what you claim to be. And genetics comes along and says, absolutely not. The red hair that became the defining Irish stereotype, that's largely Viking, carried here by raiders from Scandinavia about 1,100 years ago. The very fair skin that looks Irish to the outside world, a significant portion of that arrived with the Bronze Age steppe migrants only 4,000 years ago. But the jet black hair, the deep eyes, the skin that tans rather than burns, that goes back 10 millennia, to the very first Irish people who ever existed. If you carry those features, you are not carrying foreign blood. You are carrying the oldest blood in Ireland. In the most literal, scientifically verifiable sense possible, you are the most original Irish person in the room. There's something that keeps pulling at me about all of this, and I think it's worth sitting with for a moment before we wrap up. The Black Irish story has never really been about hair color. It's been about belonging, about who gets to claim an identity, about who decides what authentic looks like, and who gets quietly pushed to the margins because they don't fit the postcard version. The Armada myth gave dark-featured Irish people a dramatic origin story to hold on to. The American slur tried to use their darkness to deny them the identity they were claiming. Both were telling them the same underlying lie, that their dark features made them outsiders to their own heritage. The truth that genetics gives us is the complete opposite. Ireland was never ethnically simple. It was never one people, one origin, one unbroken line. It was always a layered, complex, gorgeous accumulation of human journeys, from the steppes, from Scandinavia, from Scotland, from the Near East, from within the island itself. All of those journeys are still visible, right now, in the faces on the west coast of Ireland. And the darkest, oldest-looking faces among them, they belong to the people whose ancestors have been there the longest. The Black Irish are not a mystery born from a shipwreck. They are a mystery born from time itself, from 10,000 years of survival, on an island at the edge of the world, where the Atlantic never stops reminding you that you are standing at the very end of Europe. And now, the next time someone asks you where those dark Irish faces come from, you'll have an answer that's worth giving. If this opened up something you've been wondering about your own family, your own features, your own heritage, share it with someone who carries that same dark mystery in their face and has never had a proper explanation for it. And if you've had your own DNA results come back with surprises, or if your family has its own Black Irish story passed down through the generations, drop it in the comments. Every one of those stories is a thread connecting us to the oldest chapter of the human story that Ireland has to tell.